Hi there, it's Paulie here. With the indomitable Mr. Snoots, who has accompanied me very far. So I'm in a slightly sort of colonial-esque mood. One of my favourite war games, miniatures games of all time. Here's two. This is Soldier's Companion. It's by Frank Chadwick. This was part of the Space 1889 game universe. This came out in 1989 and is still available and drive-through and so on online as a digital product. But this is sort of one of the greats of not just colonial miniatures wargaming, but kind of that 19th century era, late 19th century fights. I'll explain why. So this game comes in the tradition of things like Sword in the Flame, which was a rather brilliant colonial miniatures war game, and these were designed for 25mm figures on individual bases, grouped into companies of about 20 figures and so on. Sword in the Flame, you could get out there and you could play Zulu Wars or fight the dreaded Afghans and Pathans and those sorts of things. This takes it much further, but it remains in that bound of designed for 25mm figures on individual bases. So, what Frank and Co did is they took an interesting snapshot of all the world's armies in 1889, and it's in here. That makes this a very valuable work by itself. It's a great reference work. Rules-wise, these are very, very, very playable. They're simple in the tradition of those kinds of rules. Everything runs off a 6-sided dice. You've both got, armies. The armies are made of company units of 20 figures. They can have leaders and so on attached. Leaders represent like senior sergeants, officers, tribal leaders, that sort of thing. Your units can be arrayed in, if they are regular troops, they can be put into line, that is the bases touching, and you can form them 2 deep in line, and in 2 deep line they can all fight and all shoot. So that kind of compacts the most firepower in. You can have them in open order, where you put at least 1 base width between each miniature, and you can also have like a column which is compact and broad, that moves fast. The irregular guys, they can move in basically a mass, which should be as deep as it is wide, around about. So you can have it like 5 figures wide by 4, as best as you can get it. So it starts to get sort of interesting as you get into the weapons and some little minor tweaks that aren't offered in other colonial period rules, and they bring in some of the subtleties. So everything has a set movement depending on what it is. So some of the irregular troops, they move a random dice number, or you roll a number of dice for the number of inches they'll move on the table. So infantry will roll 3 dice, irregular cavalry will roll 5 dice. The regulars have a set movement, which is around about the average of what will be rolled on those dice by the irregulars. So the irregulars can really sometimes surprise you or sometimes kind of disappoint you. Fair enough, gives them a cool idea. Now, all firing, you've got sort of close range and long range for all of your infantry weapons and so forth. These things are listed for how many dice you will roll for a unit. A breech loading rifle will roll 1 dice for each person in the unit that can shoot. Some other things will roll less. So for instance, if it's a muzzle loading weapon, it might only roll 1 dice for every 2 figures in the unit that can shoot, or possibly even less if it's complete crap. So like there are some groups still running around with matchlocks or something, that might be 1 shot every 3. There are obviously 1889, there are bolt action rifles have come in and repeating weapons have come in. These are all kind of listed differently. They have their own rates of fire. Now, for the repeating rifles, the idea is that they do have an extremely rapid rate of fire, but then they empty their magazines and they are very slow and clumsy to reload. So they've got multiple firing rates for these. There is a sustainable rate of fire, which is usually going to be about 1 dice each, where some of you guys are firing, some are reloading. But what you can do is you can go to your rapid fire rate, which will be rolling like 2 or 3 dice per guy firing, but the unit is now unloaded and may not fire until it spends a turn stationary reloading. So, you know, mad minute, your choice. The bolt action weapons, they have a one rate of fire for long distance and a higher rate of fire for closer distances, where essentially mad minute they're allowed to, you know, work the bolts, but because of the way they strip load more swiftly, yeah, it's not as extreme a rate of fire as, say, giving everyone a bunch of Winchesters, but yeah, it is actually a more, you could see why they came in, a more generally useful thing. Now, you've got cannon and machine guns and so on. Now, the machine guns are given a couple of different fire rates. Again, there is sustainable fire, which is a number of dice that it will roll to cause hits, and there is its rapid fire mode. If you go to rapid fire, there's a chance it might jam. Again, your choice, you can push it if you want to. Cannon, yep, they've got ranges. Some cannon are mortars or howitzers, so they can fire indirect. Each one has like a damage value, and each one has a crew required to run it. If the crew takes casualties, for every 2 casualties below the listed necessary number, the rate of fire will drop by 1. So if you have to have a crew of 5, 2 of them drop dead and you've only got 3, and this thing normally fires once a turn, it's going to fire once every 2 turns. Different sorts of cannons have different sort of ammunition. The smoothbores and so on can fire cannon balls, which aren't that useful. Canister, which, you know, is, but it's only at short ranges. The balls and so on are not that useful against guys in, you know, open order. Your more sophisticated guns can fire shrapnel, which is a useful thing. It does like a general amount of damage to troops, and often regardless of the size of the shell. You can also just fire direct shell, and the damage value of the gun is going to be what causes the damage. There are some things like repeating and revolving cannon at this period, like Hotchkiss 2-pounders and these sorts of things. They can actually fire a few shots a turn, like 2 or 3 shots, but their damage value is very low, so they ping away doing tiny bits of damage, but, you know, that's kind of exciting in its way. There's, of course, you know, all the different rocket systems and that sort of thing. They're all in there. They have their own kind of accuracy notes, but, you know, the warheads are fairly good, and if they pass over someone, they can frighten them if they're irregulars, and etc. There are morale rules. So units are rated for the weapons they have, but they're also rated for their morale. They can be elite, they can be veterans, they can be experienced, they can be trained, they can be green, or they can be levies. So each of these has a value on 2d6, which will represent what it needs to meet on 2d6 to make a morale roll. The other thing they're rated for, and I quite like this, is their fieldcraft. That is how good they are at sneaking about, taking cover, and so forth. You know, kind of actually not a skill pushed in many of these armies at the time. So what happens in a game is you roll for initiative at the start of a turn. Whoever gets the initiative, and there are modifiers to that depending on leadership and how many units that you have kind of active, but They can move and shoot first. If they've moved into contact with someone, then the defenders can attempt defensive fire. So if someone's charging at you, you can fire at any range you choose during their movement. And in fact, the defenders can fire at any point during the first guy's movement. You then handle any melees or anything that happened, and then the non-initiative player does their movement. Units can only fire once, etc., etc., etc. So that is a difference from things like Sword in the Flame, which uses a card deck to move individual units on both sides almost at random. It is a my go, you go system, which does allow you to actually make more coherent assaults and defences, I have to say. All combat is done on d6, so what happens is you are rolling to hit. You roll the number of dice indicated, say, by the weapon you are using, and there will be a base number to hit depending on the range. So at close ranges, in general, you're looking for like a 4, 5 or 6 to hit, and at long range you're looking for like 5s or 6s or 6s. There are modifiers to hit if your unit is moving, if your unit is in poor morale, as in you're shaken, etc. If your target is in cover, that adds to the number you need to hit. Now, if that number is greater than you can roll on a d6, then you roll and you still hit on a d6, but your target is allowed a saving throw. So they've kept the dice down there to a minimum. Now, when someone's hit, you don't bother about it for the irregulars, but for the regulars, if and only if those regulars are fighting against irregulars, you roll to see if the person that's been hit is dead or wounded. If they are, you roll a d6, and 1, 2, lightly wounded, 3, 4, seriously wounded, and 5 or 6, they dead. The lightly wounded can move, but they're not allowed to move towards enemies. And they're not allowed to attack people in melee or shoot. You can modify that if you wish to do a mighty Rorke's thing. They can make a morale check to see if they can shoot. Seriously wounded guys cannot move. And the main reason they're keeping track of this is that if you leave your wounded to the mercy of the irregular enemies, you know, these guys will obviously, you know, turn them inside out and use them as some sort of horrendous puppet, or you know, turn their intestines into an interesting new set of Christmas lights for the family. So, well, that's a bit bad for the morale for the chaps. So you take morale hits if this happens. So in other words, the regular guys have to have like commissaries and so on, who are, and stretcher parties that are grabbing people and getting them to safe places, to keep the morale of the lads up. Alright, so kind of an interesting idea. But regulars versus regulars, or irregulars versus irregulars, etc., you don't bother about that. It's presumed that, you know, this is going on. Alright, fair enough. Melee, yeah, all figures in contact roll, and essentially you're rolling dice. There are some adds, like if you are mounted versus foot, if you're lancers that charged, if you are fanatics, etc., you gain bonuses. If one figure's dice doubles the other, then the one that is doubled is killed and taken off. If one person's dice is greater than the other, then the person who's, you know, who has been overcome their figure is taken, put at the back of their unit, kind of facing backwards as a little reminder. At the end of the turn, both sides will do a morale check, and there's a negative from the morale check equal to the number of guys that you've got at the back of your unit facing away. Again, a pretty simple system with a pretty simple visual reminder of what the negative on your dice roll is going to be. When you fail dice rolls, your morale moves up and down levels depending on how badly you screw it up. I think for every 2 that you miss the roll, you go down by 1. Irregulars, however, don't have a... one of the morale states is shaken. So basically you can be essentially... a unit can be fanatical, and some of the colonial irregular units can be. They can be steady, they're having a good time. They can be shaken. A shaken unit can only fire at half its dice, and it can't advance towards enemy units. They can be demoralized, in which case they will move away from the conflict towards the nearby safe zones. Or they can just flee and scatter, in which case they're off the board. You may attempt to rally units by moving an officer into a unit that's got morale penalties, or move the unit into them, and after this guy's been with them with a turn, you make a morale check and it will restore it by a level. As I said, the irregulars, however, don't have a shaken level. They go straight from kind of steady to withdrawing out of combat, which kind of makes them, as we played it, it's actually not bad. It makes them ebb and flow a lot, because you tend to have like your chiefs and leaders back rather than with the units. So you'll send in your wave of Zulus who will like attack. If they don't make it, they'll immediately pull way the hell back, usually well out of like effective rifle range, and you've got your chief with them. But because they don't have that extra step to work through, they come back more readily. So it's like, rally them, good, they're back to being steady again. All right, in you go. So they're really hard to get rid of, which I quite liked. I thought initially it was like penalising them and making them hard to break. No, it actually makes them like annoying. They keep coming back in waves. One of the subtle things that I love is that fieldcraft. So the most valuable part of this book, the thing I love most, is these. The back half of it is a list of every single army of any kind of real notice or import at all in 1889. It's got its in the case of the British, it's obviously gone to a great deal of detail on different units, because of the role-playing game that's come from. A lot of it was British. But, we've got the British Army, we've got their establishment on Mars, more of that later. We've got other colonial units like the African Irregulars and Hong Kong Volunteers and New Zealand militias, the various units of the Indian Army, and the different establishments, because there's like the Madras Army, there's the Bengal Army, there's the Punjabi, etc. And then it goes through all of Europe, so you've got your Austro-Hungarians, but you've got like Bulgarians, Romanians, Belgium, Bulgaria, Denmark, France, Germany, Italy, Montenegro, Graustark, which I love, Ruritania, Netherlands, Portugal, Serbia, Romania, Russia, Spain. It goes through the whole thing. Turkey, Transbalkania, and then you get into non-European armies. So it's got the armies of Abyssinia, the Burs, the Egyptian armies, other Arab units, Dahomey, Equatoria, the Hereros, the Mahdist Dervish Empire, which is still obviously a big thing at the time, sub-Saharan nations, Malagasy, the island of Madagascar, which actually has a stoush on it at the time, Madabiles, Samorian Empire of Western Sudan, Rabez Empire, that was founded by Zubair. So that's like an unpleasant little slave empire in the Sahel of Africa. Zulus, Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Mexico, United States of America, Canada. And then it's got like American Mountain Indians, American Plains Indians, because the Indians Wars are still going on. Other armies of the Americas. It's got Japan, the Khmer Empire, Afghanistan, Burma, Tongan, China, Hawaii, Siam, and then it's got all the forces of Mars. What I like about this is that it's interesting as you go through it. So you'll get these European actual units, and they'll have some that have really great morale. So my Prussian cuirassiers, or my Prussian grenadiers, or my French line infantry, or whatever, a lot of these things will have great morale, but they'll have no fieldcraft because they haven't been using it. They've been fighting in close order. So they got great morale but no fieldcraft. in a lot of other areas, so you get like Brazilian troops, Mexican troops, these sorts of things, you'll often find their fieldcraft is really good because they've been fighting in a style where they're in cover, having to make use of things. Your fieldcraft number is what deducts off the enemy's chance of hitting you if you are fighting in open order. There's a bonus for terrain as well, but basically the moment you go into open order, your fieldcraft counts. So it kind of makes a thing where if you are deploying European armies into things like African areas, you can run into trouble, because what you think of as your best troops, yeah, they've got the morale and they're going to stand there and take the punishment and, you know, deal stuff out. But they're terrible at fighting in scrub and, you know, getting into hills and just fighting in that more skirmishing style. And any units that are in close order take double casualties if fired at with volleys and so forth. That's an option you can do. You can, with regular troops, you can elect to fire volleys if you are in close order. So 2 close order units hammering at each other do double damage. They really smash into each other. But firing at guys who are like taking advantage of the cover and, you know, going from rock to rock or fold to fold in the ground, the guys in close order can run into trouble. Sure, they can come forward to try and melee, but they're going to take damage as they try and do it, which is exactly what the British found against the Boers. So yeah, there's that interesting conundrum. My best troops may not be the best. My Grenadier Guards might have fantastic morale, but they've got fieldcraft 0. Whereas my local kind of my local kind of crap infantrymen, as you would think, from my colonial area, they've got very ordinary morale, but my god, their fieldcraft is great. These guys excel at not being shot, so they've actually probably got way more staying power. Yeah, and of course the cavalry is a magnificent trap, because a lot of the cavalry has very high morale, of course, and gosh, you want your cuirassiers, you know, your Prussian cuirassiers or your French heavies to go thundering along, and of course they've got no fieldcraft at all, and if they dismount they probably only got like carbines and various other crappy things. In fact, some of the European armies don't really bother much at all with firearms for their cavalry. They do have carbines, but they might be just almost, some of them are still using like just like a really simple breech loading carbine. You'll get some things we can see like American cavalry on the plains. Yeah, so they're getting like breech loading carbines and so on, but they've got a little bit of fieldcraft because they're used to, you know, dismounting. So yes, the way you use things, very interesting. I really like it. It's quite clever. Now these rules are set up so that they can dovetail into the role-playing game Space 1889. So there are a series of science fiction rules which take this above and beyond just a cool skirmishy battle game for 19th century troops. They bring in the armies of Mars and the expeditionary forces that are on Mars. They bring in Selenites and Venusians and so forth. Space 1889 is it was a game with execrable rules but a fantastic setting, and I'll love it forever. So as part of that, it's got some of the super science of that setting. So there are vehicle rules in this, how to design them and how to deploy them and how to blow them up. So you can make tripods or land fortresses or different flying ships. You can do dreadnoughts and submarines under these rules as well. God help us, you could do like earth borers or whatever. It's all in there. And that's where some of the damage values and so on the cannons start to pay off. They're for like doing damage to big clanky things. But they have other cool things in these rules. So they have siege rules built in. They're nice and useful and simple. They give a good siege game, they really do. You can get in there and storm the gates, play a game. It's not long and tedious. So you can attack that Martian fortress. You can, break into that strange palace on Venus, or hell, you can bust into the evil Sultan's palace, in the Sahel, where he's been taking all these people slaves, what have you. You can do it. So they're in there. There are also some very simple campaign rules in there, and as the designer explains, he's seen many campaigns over the year die simply because they got bogged down in extra ridiculous campaign rules, and nobody really wanted to play them. They just got more and more, function over form. These rules, however, they give you what you need. They set up things for doing like a hex map based campaign. Troops, how far they move, how supply works, can you forage for supplies in some areas? If so, what's involved. Scouting, how to send guys out, scout the area, find things, find tracks, etc. Simple. It's everything that you need to do a campaign, and it gives you then some sample scenarios for battles. It gives you some sample sieges to play, and it gives you some campaigns to play. So it gives you the full spread of things to use the rules in. As I said, these are, I think, probably the great 19th century skirmish rules. Sword in the Flame was certainly more popular and still has many adherents. This has largely disappeared. Where this shines, apart from its science fiction rules, is that it has good simple rules. There's no great surprises in these rules, except for that fieldcraft idea, which I think is rather brilliant. It's very simple, but it puts a subtlety into the game. There's a big difference between a nice shiny European army standing there gleaming in the sun and a bunch of scruffy lads in khaki worming their way through the brush. And you start to see it. You suddenly look at it and, we hold the phone, Brazilian caçadores are not that bad. Take a look at this. They are trained, but they've got high fieldcraft, and someone's given them bolt action rifles. So, it's not just that difference between tech, it's that difference between morale and training. So there's like an interesting spread of things to do. Whoops. So I think this is a sterling effort. I think it deserves more love. It should certainly come back out. For those of you who are Colonials players, or those of my friends from A Gentleman's War, those sorts of websites, yes, this absolutely should be played. It absolutely should be. It's a great piece of work, and those details on the armies are priceless. It really is good. As you look through Romania or somewhere like that, and it's got, okay, here's their line infantry, here's their rifle regiments, here's their Dorobanze, their auxiliary infantry, here's their frontier guard units, etc. Here's their regular cavalry, the Rossiori, here's the auxiliary cavalry, and it's like, oh, I see. So you could do a really good kind of imaginations campaign using these very well. Or if you want to do like a mighty fight of Raustark versus Grozny, you can do it. You can also play your campaigns on Mars, or you can just fight in strange backwaters, all sorts of things. So it's uniquely flexible, and it gives you lots of information. It's actually been a reference book that has served me in good stead. It was well researched and well done. Frank Chadwick did a great job on these. I think they need a lot more love. We certainly still play them. I have a mass of Martians and British on Mars here, and I also have some French Foreign Legion for Mars. We are betrayed, we are betrayed. So it is a great game. So anyway, take a look at them, find them online, and let's keep the dice rolling. Old games are often very good games. They often didn't disappear simply because they weren't any good. We just lost them in the incredible noise of all the stuff that's available. So these ones are well worth bringing out again. Anyway, hope to see everyone around the game table sometime, and look after yourselves. Cheers.